Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today we're going to be taking another look at a small slice of the action in my 2021 draft guide collection with my top 24 fantasy football wide receivers for this up-and-coming season. We're right around the corner. September's almost here. I cannot wait for kickoff. But if you're still looking for help in your fantasy leagues this season, I've got you covered here by watching my videos, checking out the draft guide, and all the other awesome stuff we've got going on here on the channel. Today, again, we're covering my top 24 wideouts, but in that draft guide collection, it's packed with information and is one of the best values out there on the fantasy football market. You've got yourself player positional rankings where with the wide receiver position alone, I've got my top 125 players listed. Obviously, you've got tight ends, quarterbacks, and running backs as well, and even some defensive rankings in there. 60 must-own players ranging from rounds 1 through 20 in 12-team leagues, sleeper candidates, bust candidates, draft day cheat sheets, and obviously a top 250 big board for the most important players this fantasy season. We've also got some social medias, a Discord server to check out. That's in the link in today's video in the description down below. So go check that out. There's a bunch of awesome stuff to get your hands on before this fantasy season gets started. But without further ado, you all, let's hit that intro and get straight in to my first player. One more quick note on that community Discord before we get started with today's episode. We are just below 50 members in that server and would love to cross that marker here within the next day or so. If you haven't checked that out, you should absolutely do so. We set the goal a few months back to have 100 members in there prior to the start of this NFL season. I don't know if we'll get there, but it'd be awesome if we could at least make a crack at it. We've got giveaways going on there. Again, mock drafts. That'll be part of that giveaway process throughout the rest of this off season per se. And we've got discussions in there. We're building fantasy leagues and other great stuff. So go check that out. The link is in the description of today's video, and we'd love to have you in there. With that being said, Davante Adams is my top wide receiver on the board. The only time that has changed this offseason has been when Aaron Rodgers actually looked like he was not going to play for Green Bay. But that's old news now. He's back on the field. He seems to be happy and just vibing with the team. So there's no reason for me to not put the player who has the highest target percentage of any player in any respective offense in the league. 34% of the passes in Green Bay head Davante Adams' way, and over the last 5 years, no one has scored more receiving touchdowns than Davante Adams has. He has the most double-digit receiving touchdown seasons. 4 of the last 5 of them have been so, and he might be one of the best route runners, if not the best route runner in the entire league. So a lot of stuff you love here. You're getting the volume, you're getting the touchdown production, you're getting the yardage. It's all there. This dude is a magnet for the football. Aaron Rodgers is one of the best quarterbacks to have facilitating those passes your way. At number 2, I've got Stefon Diggs here. The reason I have him ahead of Tyreek Hill, who is the next player, spoiler alert on this list, is I think that we can see an increase in touchdown production from what we saw based off of last season. Only 7 for Diggs last year. That's not a terrible number, but I can definitely expand upon that and improve. I think that the Bills have a perfect chemistry going here with Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs. We actually just saw this as a random off point, but Stefon Diggs is warming up the arm, so maybe we'll see him throw a pass this season. We've seen him do that with the Vikings in the past. But nonetheless, that's not overly important because even if he throws an interception on that play, he's going to be dang good as a receiver. Stefon Diggs is one of the most explosive players, the best field stretchers, and he honestly is right up there in that class with Davante Adams in terms of elite fantasy football route running, or at least elite NFL route running, which translates to points in fantasy football. Because when you're getting separation, you're getting the ball thrown your way. So I'm very confident in Diggs this season, as opposed to a Tyreek Hill, who I'm also still confident that will be a top wide receiver. But his touchdown count, I'm expecting some regression from. That's why he's down here at 3 on the list. He is not a prototypical red zone type player in terms of his stature and his build. He will stretch the field. He will hit the home run ball. He will make big plays. But Tyreek is not going to be the guy that's going up, winning contested passes and getting jump balls inside the 20-yard line. Yes, he has the speed and the route running to create separation in that area of the field, but he's not even the number 1 target on his team. And it sounds like I'm knocking him very harshly here. I'm just trying to reason with you and explain why he's down here at 3, because I'm a bit lower on him than most of the other fantasy football analysts out there. Tyreek's a great player. He's going to make big plays. He's going to have some of the highest boom weeks of anyone in the league. But I also think that with Kelsey in that offense, the fact that maybe we'll see and this is something that I don't exactly think will be penciled in, but if the Chiefs do expand upon that run game like I believe they should, that might mean less overall passing attempts, and it'll see a slight trickle down in the impact on Tyreek Hill's fantasy value. Again, I still think he's a top 3 wide receiver. He will have weeks where he's the best wide receiver in fantasy football. He will put up those numbers, have those games where he is better than everyone else in a given week. But at the end of the day, I don't think he finishes higher than the wide receiver 3 because I just think there's a couple things that other players have working for him that he doesn't exactly have favorably in his fantasy situation, although he does have the best quarterback in the league throwing to him, so we can't ever discount him on a given week, a given play, etc. Calvin Ridley, my wide receiver 4 here. I had him bumped down to 5 behind DeAndre Hopkins. I've since flipped that back the other direction. Ridley's route running, the assessment I've had on this Falcons offense, it's just all too good. I think that when you look at him as a player, he has shown last season he has the potential and the talent to be a true number 1 in this league. There's no reason he can't be. He has, watch some of his detailed route running that he does and how he separates from corners. This is not a player who's just winning with speed. He's not winning just with contested catchability. He's not just scoring touchdowns. He's doing it all. He's a complete player, a polished NFL wide receiver, and I think that he still isn't quite given the respect that he deserves based on the sample size that he's shown us from his play and what he's actually capable of doing. No Julio Jones means more targets, means more opportunities, more volume in this offense. That's all going to bode well for him in fantasy. Maybe we see a drop in some efficiency due to the fact that he might see an uptick in targets, but then be less effective with each given rep. I've talked about this with Alvin Kamara. Increased workload still means more chances, which means you're more likely than not going to hit those numbers, hit those markers, and be on pace for where we expect you to be at. Kyle Pitts will be involved in this offense. He'll be throwing the football a lot. He should see his fair share of opportunities to get work in this offense, but Calvin Ridley is still the top dog in this passing offense. And when you talk about a team that plays with a bad defense, it's probably not going to be a good football team. They are rebuilding. They're going to be passing the ball a ton, trying to stay in games late and catch up down the stretch. That is a big help for fantasy because garbage time doesn't mean anything different than the first quarter for us, at least in terms of our fantasy football stat production. DeAndre Hopkins here at the wide receiver 5 position, 1,400 yards last season, some of the best catch rate percentages in the National Football League just in terms of how often he catches the targets thrown his way. He's probably a better NFL wide receiver than a Calvin Ridley, maybe even than a Tyreek Hill because he is such a complete, a polished, a dependable player. But at least in terms of fantasy value, I've got him down here at the number 5 spot. He's another guy who I think could easily increase his touchdown production. He only had 6 of them last year. Again, 1,400 yards is pretty incredible in your first year in an offense with no offseason. But I think that overall, I like the upside of these other players a bit better. DeAndre Hopkins is getting later and later into his prime. I don't think he's out of it. I think he'll still be incredibly productive. He's got, again, glue fingers. Like the man literally does not drop passes. I love the combination with him and Kyler Murray. I think Kyler reminds me of a young Russell Wilson type player in that size, stature, mobility, ability to throw a beautiful deep pass. But I think that just how good and saturated the top end wide receivers are in the top 4 here makes it really hard for D-Hop to crack that group. But I would not be surprised to see a finish higher than this wide receiver 5 spot. DK Metcalf here, the wide receiver 6 finisher, pencils right in at my wide receiver 6 spot. Metcalf's got a crazy high ceiling. I think the reason he's not higher, though, is because of the floor. I feel more confident with each of the first 5 players on this list, in addition to feeling great about their ceilings as well. Metcalf is no slouch in terms of his floor. He's not a player that I wouldn't even classify him as boom or bust, but the amount of games last year where he only had 4 catches that resulted in his whole great fantasy outing just kind of shows you that the volume isn't necessarily there, and it's because it doesn't have to be, but it still, as a fantasy owner, makes me conscious enough to look at that and say, well, I would rather see him have 8 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown instead of 4 for 60 and a touchdown. You get what I'm saying here? He's great, undeniably. The talent is awesome. The ceiling is off the charts. If he is starting to get 8 receptions per game, his numbers will be through the roof. I'm just saying I feel better about these other players because the targets are higher. The target share is greater for the other players ahead of him on this list, and therefore I see their floors being better. Again, although I think these guys all have excellent ceilings, and that is not something we're lacking here with these top 12 wideouts at any point. Justin Jefferson is a riser for me right now. This dude was incredible to watch last year. 1,400 yards as a rookie wideout, 140 targets, only 7 touchdowns, finished as wide receiver 7. I had to bump him up, and I'll explain why I did so in a second, over 2 other players on this list. But man, I think that with his route running, his poised technique, his ability to produce at such a young age, straight out of college, he should take over as the top dog in Minnesota this year. There should be no question as to Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson who is the best wideout, who's the most targeted, most utilized player. It will be Justin Jefferson this season. He is, not to take anything away from Adam Thielen, he makes this list as well as a top 24 wideout, but he is not on the same playing field at this point in his career as Justin Jefferson is. I expect, or at least hope, project, can be optimistic that those touchdowns will increase this season and ultimately play a greater role in his fantasy value this year. 1,400 yards is going to be pretty hard to top for a player who did that, let alone as a rookie, but it shows you the groundwork, the foundation level has been laid there, and he will have the opportunity to grow upon that if he can stay healthy and produce at a consistent level. A.J. Brown, I had to move him back here. He is now my wide receiver 8 for this fantasy season. He's been as high as wide receiver 3, but that changed once they brought in Julio Jones. A.J. Brown has to move down for me because the Titans have COVID right now. Their quarterback is out right now for 5 to 10 days. Mike Vrabel's out for 5 to 10 days. That's going to mess up the chemistry a little bit, make things, they might get a little bit rocky weeks 1 and 2. They're going to have to, they had this issue last season, reintegrate themselves into the offense. They're going to have to redevelop that spark, that chemistry, and get back into a rhythm, clean things up once their quarterback and head coach come back. That's 2 of the most important players in your team you're now missing for a chunk of time due to those close contact tracing or whatever it might have been. A.J. Brown's a player who I was already a little bit worried about in terms of his floor because like a DK Metcalf, even to a more extreme extent, he's now going to become extremely dependent on having ridiculously efficient play. He's a boom-bust guy this year. So is Julio Jones, who again also makes this list. But A.J. Brown is going to have to find ways to make it work with 3 or 4 catches on some weeks, and he's going to have to find ways to either score a touchdown or a crack 80 to 100 receiving yards in those games, because with another number 1 wide receiver on your team, you're already looking at a reduction in how much work you individually are going to get, on top of the fact that this is a smash mouth, run the football first offense. You're already losing, last season, 397 total touches to Derrick Henry. So there's a lot of other mouths to feed in this offense that are very significant, and you're going to have to overcome that just based off of your pure talent and ability to produce at a rapidly efficient rate with your own touches you're given. So I love A.J. Brown. He should be. I wish he was higher on this list, but that situation is kind of digging into his fantasy value right now, and obviously the unfortunate situation of COVID has as well. Keenan Allen for the Los Angeles Chargers here, one of my favorite floor plays for this fantasy season, who I also think has a pretty darn good ceiling as well. Justin Herbert was one of the most impressive rookie quarterbacks a year ago, and I don't see any signs or reason for him to have drawback or slow down. He is one of those players like a Davante Adams, Keenan Allen, it's like a target magnet. He just racks up receptions for his team. Keenan's not the most flashy player in the league, but his routes are pristine. He finds separation in both man and zone coverage. And although he's not a touchdown hog, that's what kind of keeps him lower on this list. As we move down the board here, we're looking at less and less players who have that elite touchdown upside. Keenan still can get between 8 and 10 for you, and that's good enough for him to be a solid quality, established top 10 fantasy football wide receiver when he's getting the work and the usage that I expect him to get in this offense. In PPR leagues, that won't matter, and he'll still be able to sink his roots into the ground as one of the best week-to-week options. Allen Robinson for the Chicago Bears. I've talked about this one all offseason. Thank you, Bears. I am a Packer fan. Bears are a rival team. This dude deserved better, though. I cannot wait to see him get on the field with Justin, and I always say that, get on the field with Justin Fields. It's so repetitive. It drives me nuts. But anyways, Justin Fields is going to take the top off defenses. He is finally going to be a legitimate field-stretching threat. I just can't wait to see. I've always been a huge Allen Robinson fan dating back to him in Jacksonville. I've thought of him very highly. His routes are very good. He's a technician. He doesn't always find the most separation, but he wins those contested grabs. He finds a way to get open at the top of his routes, and he just makes plays. I can't wait to see what he's going to do when he actually has a quarterback that can fit it into the window that he needs it to be in instead of having quarterbacks who, when he gets open downfield, just airmail it over his head and waste the whole down. So I think A-Rob's ceiling could take a turn to another dimension that we haven't seen just yet down the stretch of the year once Justin gets acclimated to this offense. I think that maybe as soon as week 3, he could be the starter there. I'm no Bears insider, but I watched Andy Dalton get booed when he walks on and off the field in Chicago, and I know how crazed those fans are for their young quarterback. Matt Nagy says he is emphatic on not rooting Justin Fields, but you have to feel the pressure at some point, and that's something that you can't just dismiss. So A-Rob is definitely going to have Fields for at least half the season at bare minimum. Terry McLaurin, this is a must-own player for me this season and an absolute league winner. I think that the ceiling that Terry McLaurin provides to us here as a late third-round pick is extremely, extremely tough to pass on. There's not another player who we've necessarily seen on the board at this point. I would say that Terry McLaurin's ceiling is higher than both Keenan Allen and Allen Robinson. That might be a little bit of a hot take on my part, but I think that the overall top end upside he can reach is higher than both of those two players. Now, the floor is much lower. That's why I think that he is rated below those two in my eyes, because I see Ryan Fitzpatrick as a bit of a wild card here. Terry has been a take the top off the defense type player, a field stretcher, and an elite player downfield in his first 2 NFL seasons here. Heading into year 3, this is the put it all together year. This is the cherry on top. You're entering your prime. Show us what you got. And the only thing that's holding him back is going to be those inconsistencies from Ryan Fitzpatrick. When he's on, this combination is going to be lethal, and they are going to absolutely smoke opposing defenses. When Fitzmagic is in his reverse bag and he's throwing 4 picks in games and can't seem to hit a slant route to save his life, that is going to impact Terry McLaurin negatively, obviously, because you have to get him the football first before he can produce those numbers. But when things are clicking, I expect Terry to be one of the most dangerous. Like he could potentially walk out here and win you a fantasy week by himself. That's how good I see his ceiling being. Think back to a lesser player at this stage in his career, respectively, in Deshaun Jackson in Tampa Bay. The numbers he was putting up with Fitzmagic as a field-stretching threat in what? I think Deshaun Jackson was over the 30-year hump at that point. I believe that if he wasn't, he was either age 29 or 28. And then on top of that, Fitzmagic was playing in, I mean, this was kind of the birth of Fitzmagic, to be honest. I guess he was also Fitzmagic with, well, I think the nickname Fitzmagic came from his time during Tampa Bay, but we've seen plenty great Ryan Fitzpatrick moments dating back to the Texans and the Jets and all those other teams. But the point being here is that Ryan Fitzpatrick has made other wide receivers of lesser stature, talent, and whatnot of McLaurin be league-winning players that can walk out and blow up your fantasy games. Terry is very talented. He's proven at this point 2 seasons in a row with very solid production. When he's on, he is going to be on to a deadly extent here. That's something I want to have as a part of my fantasy roster. And if you can get him again in that 3rd round of 12-team leagues, oops, sorry there, I just bumped the microphone. That should be something very, very advantageous for fantasy managers. Ceedee Lamb, a riser for me on the board here. I finally went ahead and done it. I've been picking him ahead of Amari Cooper in mock drafts. And for me, that was kind of the distinguishing time when I was like, okay, we need to start putting him ahead of Amari in the rankings list, because I wasn't picking based off of my rankings, because something deep down was just telling me, all right, I feel better, I feel safer, more comfortable picking Ceedee Lamb over Cooper for my actual teams. So then I need to put that on display here, back that up, put my money where my mouth is. Ceedee Lamb, I now have as a fringe wide receiver 1 for this fantasy season, my wide receiver 12, so obviously a wide receiver 1 in 12-team leagues. Not the best scenario if he's going to be your first wide receiver taken off the board, but the upside here is ridiculous. Just like Terry McLaurin, I love these 2 picks because although they're not the safest in the world, wide receiver is one of those spots where any given week a player could go off. And when you have the talent of a Terry McLaurin, of a Ceedee Lamb in pass-happy offenses, and I only say that about the Washington football team because Fitzmagic is there and they're going to get in spots where he throws picks, they're trailing, they're going to have to throw that ball to keep up and keep pace with the other team. I just love what I see from Ceedee Lamb as an all-around player from a talent perspective in Dallas's pass-happy offense under Mike McCarthy. Hopefully Dak Prescott is back and healthy, ready to go this year. And I've said this a bunch this offseason, but Amari was only targeted 5 more times in those first 5 games when Dak Prescott was healthy last year. Take the rest of the season out, crumple it up, throw it away. That was not reliable quarterback play. That's not what we're getting this season. Dak's supposed to be back, healthy, ready to go. That's the main thing that helped me make this choice to bump Ceedee Lamb up, because if I was still having question marks about those injuries, I don't think I could have made this move on my rankings list. But the point being, it's happened. So I'm able to do that, and I feel very comfortable, very confident with Ceedee Lamb this high on my list. It's the highest he's ever been, but I expect that, he has the ceiling to potentially finish higher than this spot in the season end rankings if he's able to reach this ceiling on a more consistent basis, and I expect him to do so. But with Dak back, the targets are going to be there, the upside is going to be there, the points are going to be there on the board, because Dallas is going to be chucking the ball downfield and scoring a heck of a lot of them in order to keep up in those games. Robert Woods. So we're getting into my wide receiver 2s now. This is a different situation. The more that I've looked at the draft boards, the more that I've broken down my picks while I've been on the clock making tough choices, the more I found myself wanting to draft Woods this season. And this is, again, a unique situation, because whereas there's been a lot of great upside with all of these previous picks, I think there's still healthy upside with Robert Woods here, but it's nowhere near the extent that it is for some of these other players. What I love here is the floor value and the comfortability I have with Robert Woods being a player that isn't going to mess up my lineup on a given week. I just love this offensive situation with Matthew Stafford taking the helm here. I think that the target share, the usage, the volume that he's going to see, both as he's always been used as a jet sweep player and a wide receiver run game type option for Sean McVay's offense. With Matt Stafford taking over, I think that his ceiling gets a little bit better than it was with Jared Goff. It was never exceptional with Goff under center, but the floor was always there at least, and we could always feel confident about him as a low-end number 1 or a high-end number 2 for our fantasy lineups, and I think that he remains that same player this season. Again, at the end of the day, I just feel better, more confident with his quarterback play, which should in turn impact his results as a fantasy player. In standard leagues, he'll be fantastic, I think, this year. In PPR leagues, he should get the job done as well, because he's going to have the usage to produce for us in those platforms. This is not a flashy pick. This is not something that you walk out and you feel like you won your league with. But at the very least, if you find yourself going with 3 straight running backs at the top of the board, which is an extreme scenario, but if you're looking like, oh man, I need a wide receiver 1 right now, my first pick in the 4th round, I need to make a move to establish that position group, and I don't want to make a bust-worthy pick at this point, take too much of a risk. Robert Woods is kind of a guy you can feel safe just kind of resting your hat on as a top-end player for your fantasy roster. And at the end of the day, again, this pick will not win you leagues, but I think that what we can at least feel comfortable with is that it won't lose you your league if you pick him in that 4th. Sometimes he falls to the 5th, but that's not very frequent that happens. Mike Evans, I've got as my wide receiver 14, so I moved him down just 1 slot here. The reasoning, again, is that I feel less confident in Mike Evans' floor. That's kind of the reason for Robert Woods' surge up my rankings list. He's actually moved up 4 or 5 places since last time. I think that Evans has a very good ceiling. I think that potentially him and Tom Brady could be an elite connection this year. But what I don't feel good about is he barely cracked the 1,000-yard threshold last season. He was so incredibly dependent on the touchdown passes last year. I think that he is the type of player, he has the stature, the size, the body of work to show us that touchdowns will continue to be an involved part of his offensive situation. But what I don't want to do is toss out a wide receiver that I'm picking as a high-end number 2 option and feel like I'm living or dying on the touchdown pass every week. At least with Robert Woods, I feel like I'm going to get my yardage and my overall floor level output based solely around his volume. And then a touchdown is an added bonus on that, and that can help give me a ceiling. For Mike Evans, I feel like it's all or nothing. I mean, he literally had games last year when the only passes he caught were touchdowns. That is ridiculous. Like 1 reception, 1 yard, touchdown. 2 receptions, 2 yards, touchdown. This is real game stat lines from Mike Evans last season. It's literally absurd to think of, but he literally had games where he was catching 1 yard touchdown passes, and that was the end of the story. So he's also the 3rd most targeted player in his offense once Antonio Brown was on the field last season. Chris Godwin is number 2 in target share for the Bucs offense, and then Mike Evans is down here at number 3. So I actually do have him ranked as the highest of those 3 players, obviously. But again, we're clinging to touchdown value here, and if he doesn't produce for us in that area of the field, it's going to be a big-time disappointment, and that could end up in an ugly situation for us. Amari Cooper. So obviously with Ceedee Lamb higher on the list, Amari Cooper had to fall. This is something I've went back and forth with so much, and I made an entire video about Amari Cooper versus Ceedee Lamb, but you can see now I've had a change of heart. I actually said at that time in that video that Ceedee Lamb was a better value, and if you're going to pick one of the Dallas wide receivers, I'd rather just have you pick Ceedee Lamb later on. But their ADPs since then have literally squeezed down, and I'm pretty sure they're within like a range of 1 or 2 draft picks of each other. So they have been extremely smushed, and their values have been very blended together. But at this point in time, I'm very comfortable saying Ceedee Lamb is the better draft pick. I think that he'll have the same, if not more, target share percentage than Amari Cooper in the Dallas offense, more touchdowns than Amari Cooper, because CD is more of a complete route tree runner. He basically does things at all 3 levels of the defense. To me, Amari Cooper is more of a slant or a deep downfield player. He's explosive. He's very smooth. He's a very electrifying player with the ball in his hands. But I see less success from Amari Cooper in the short and intermediate routes than I do see from him when he is literally just running past somebody on a fade ball. And another thing it's kind of a stretch, but he has been a bit quiet on the road at times throughout his career. He's a much better player inside Dallas's indoor stadium than he is on the road, outdoors, and cold weather games. I just think that at times there's a level of toughness that comes into things here, and it's not the biggest deal, but at least in terms of consistency when Amari is playing on the road, it hasn't always been something fantastic and has definitely improved since he's went to Dallas as opposed to when he's with the Raiders. But something I'll at least bring up here in the sense that I just think that Ceedee Lamb is a more reliable player for us, and while they both have great upside, I think Ceedee will hit his upside more often than Cooper does this season. Chris Godwin, the other of those 2 Buccaneers wide receivers I touched on in today's video. Obviously, Antonio Brown I touched on as well, but he does not crack the top 24 list. Chris Godwin has a higher target share percentage, albeit only by 1%. It's 19% Godwin to 18% Mike Evans. But I think that the touchdowns, while they are still there every once in a while for Chris Godwin, Mike Evans is still the alpha in that area of the field, and Gronkowski is as well. That doesn't leave a whole lot of touchdown volume and upside in the passing game for a Chris Godwin being at best the team's number 3, maybe even number 4 option in the red zone because of Antonio Brown's status down the stretch of last season. AB scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl. We just don't know how things are going to shake up. I feel more confident telling you that, I don't love projecting touchdowns year over year. I don't like making that a staple in a player's fantasy football situation. But if I'm going to have to, if you're going to force me to make that tough choice in someone's role, give me the big 6'3" wide receiver, or what is Mike Evans? I think he's actually 6'5", if I recall correctly. Box out players, jump balls. That's his game. That's Gronkowski's game. Those are the big bodied weapons in the red zone. Chris Godwin is no small player either, but he's more of that slot role, the route runner. He can go up, make great catches. He can run the route tree. He's an excellent player, and if Jameis Winston was still the quarterback of this offense, I'd probably like Chris Godwin better as a fantasy asset, but that's not exactly the role we're seeing here. Brady does still throw the ball downfield, but I think Mike Evans is just the better option for us in fantasy this season of the Bucs wideouts. As much as I would rather have Chris Godwin higher, as much as I would rather tell you he's a better PPR play and whatnot, at the end of the day, the upside belongs to Mike Evans, and both of their floors aren't all that awesome just because of the spread out array of target shares that has to be put through this offense because of how many options they have to get the ball to. Julio Jones is basically just A.J. Brown on steroids at this point in terms of a boom-bust player. Can he stay healthy? We'll see. Hamstrings always seem to be an issue for him the last few years. If he's not available, I don't think it's too big of a stretch to say we might not get Julio for 4 or 5 games this year. I would love to see him play every game for us this season and suit up for all those contests. I never wish an injury upon a player, but it has been kind of his track record the last couple seasons that he's going to get dinged up, maybe miss some time, or at least come into games at less than 100%. And yes, every NFL player comes into games at less than 100%, but as Julio gets older here, it seems like the rate that's occurring at is increasing. He's either going to take the top off defenses, have a huge game, or he's going to probably leave us less than satisfied here. I just don't see a situation coming out where Julio Jones can be Falcons Julio and consistently give us wide receiver 1 numbers on a week-to-week basis, especially not when we're talking about a low passing volume offense with another true alpha on the field with him. Obviously, Calvin Ridley was that last season, but Julio only played in 9 games. So there's a gap. There's a difference here between the Falcons passing offense and the Titans passing offense. The Titans run the ball a heck more than the Falcons ever did, so that's already going to take down his opportunities and the potential for volume he has in this offense. So that just lowers his floor to me. The ceiling, again, is still excellent, still there, but you're looking at more of a boom-bust play than anything at this point. Tyler Lockett, a must-own player for me in the 5th round of 12-team leagues. Love him with the Seattle Seahawks. Him and Russell Wilson have an elite chemistry and elite connection. Their field stretching ability, their connection down the red zone to make tight window passes and toe drag catches on the sideline. This is one of those situations where he was a bit boom-bust last season. Actually, he was incredibly boom-bust last season. But I chalk that up to the fact that he was injured for part of last year and used more as a decoy than he was actually being deployed out there to make high volume games and string those together. DK Metcalf is the clear number 1 choice in this offense. He's the clear top dog there, but that doesn't mean that there's not still upside in a very legitimate involved role for Tyler Lockett with the Seahawks. One of these few teams that actually has 2 wide receivers on this list. We've obviously got the Bucks, the Vikings, the Titans have got this, Seahawks now, and then the Rams. Then everyone else I think just has 1 per team. But Tyler Lockett here, I like the upside so much that it's too good to pass on for me at this point. I think that the Hawks are going to get back to more of a balanced attack this year. I think they're going to increase their rushing numbers, but I think that actually bodes well for the efficiency of this offensive group. Russ was doing a little bit too much cooking towards the end of last season. Defenses seem to have figured out the passing offense, and there was a lot more interceptions, turnovers, sacks. The overall output and the positive impact of that was rapidly declining by the end of last year. So I'm hoping that by increasing the balance, by increasing the running efficiency here, they should overall become more effective with all of their plays, and then that should trickle down, hopefully give us some better value on the back end here. So Tyler Lockett, an incredibly high upside play, someone I'm not passing on in those little 5th round windows there of draft day. Cooper Kupp, my wide receiver 19, he has fallen a little bit for me, but this is still a situation I love. With the Rams going back to Matthew Stafford, that whole passing offense is going to get better, and I think that Cooper Kupp being a slot weapon, being a player who can run all the routes, he can also stretch the field. He is an incredibly underrated NFL player, and even more so fantasy player. I think every year we kind of just discount him because he's not the most physically imposing player. He's not the flashiest guy. He's more of a dull pick per se. But the main thing that I think has been hurting him the last couple seasons, A, is that he's had some injuries, but B, is that Jared Goff, the less confidence he had. When Jared Goff was at his best, Cooper Kupp was doing amazing things. But as we saw Jared Goff's confidence decline and deteriorate the last couple of years, so have Cooper Kupp's numbers, and that has played a big-time role in his fantasy perception here. We've seen Matthew Stafford throughout his career have multiple productive receivers on one team. Go back to Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones on the same team. We've seen it happen before and over an extended period of time. I don't think these 2 players are in play style necessarily comparable to Golladay and Marvin Jones, but it's a very, very good 1-2 punch. And again, with that Rams offensive attack taking a bit of a ding, losing some of their running backs, losing some of that phase of the game, they might become just a smidge more pass reliant here. They did trade for Sony Michel, but that still doesn't fill the entire void of losing a Cam Akers. This might be a 55% pass to 45% run football team, but they're going to be very efficient. They're going to pick up first downs, move the chains at a rapid pace. And with the overall offensive output being higher for the Rams this season, or at least expecting it to be with Matthew Stafford, it's a very good situation and a team I'd really like to invest in this year. Brandon Aiyuk, it was hard for me to put him behind Cooper Kupp. I love Aiyuk's fantasy value, his upside this season. But I can't quite do it yet. It's neck and neck for me between Aiyuk and Cooper Kupp, but they're both excellent fantasy options. I would love to draft either of these players at their respective ADPs. Aiyuk's another one of those players. He's essentially, in my eyes, a young Robert Woods with higher top-end upside and very similar usage in his offense. He gets those wide receiver run game plays. He gets used close to the line of scrimmage and is able to make yards after the catch. That's where he gets his value from. But he can also run routes downfield. He can also be used as a field-stretching vertical weapon. You talk about Jimmy Garoppolo being the quarterback in this offense early on. Maybe that caps his ceiling to a point, but if we ever see Trey Lance unleash what he could potentially be, then that's where I see Aiyuk skyrocketing up this list and potentially having the upside to finish much, much higher than I currently have him ranked here in the offseason. So there's a chance with this Aiyuk pick where you're getting him in the late 5th round, early 6th round of these 12-team leagues right now. His return on investment for you could be exponentially better than where you end up actually drafting him at. So it's a very valuable asset for fantasy this year. I am getting me as many shares of Aiyuk as possible. Now here at the back end of this list, my number 21 player, Kenny Golladay. We're getting into some players that I think deserve to be top 24 fantasy football wide receivers this year, but they're not necessarily players I'm excited about drafting or would even advise you to draft. I think at other spots, you're better suited drafting another position where these guys are going based off of ADP, but obviously I can't just hop over them in the rankings and get back to the players I then like at the next part because the situation and the upside still makes them better options, but these are incredibly risky floor plays, or is essentially where I'm going with this. So Kenny Golladay, we've seen be a wide receiver 1 in the past for the Lions. He obviously has the framework, the build. He can be an elite red zone weapon. He can, we've seen him have elite bodily awareness, make ridiculous contested grabs, and make some spectacular highlights during his time as a Lion. Now he's a New York Giant, new team, dealt with injuries last season. That's why he finished as the wide receiver 103. He just wasn't available for us. But the thing that comes into risk here is injury. He's already had some issue with a hamstring in camp this year. That's what plagued him last season. That's why he did not play for us. That's why we were so let down with his overall production last season, was because he just was not out there on the field. And the other part of this, obviously, being Daniel Jones. Obviously, he didn't have the chance to produce consistently with Matt Stafford last season, and obviously would have been their final year together. But Daniel Jones is a big-time downgrade as a pure passer in comparison to Matt Stafford. I think that at face value, at minimum, Kenny Galladay's floor takes a hit because of that. And then if you look at this Giants offensive situation, they are a very crowded receiving room. This is a very talented skill position group that has a lot of depth. So if he's unable to stay healthy, could he lose out on some targets, some volume, some opportunities to some of these other players, like a first-round pick, Kadarius Toney, like a Sterling Shepard, who's a very, very consistent piece in that offense, a Darius Slayton? Maybe. So Kenny's got to get his act together. He's going to have to play this thing right from game 1 moving forward. He's going to have to assert himself as the top dog in this offense. It looks like on paper this could be a very good fantasy situation. There's just a lot of risk factors that go into this as well that could make it less than desirable if things don't work out early. And if they don't, I would hit the panic button. I've drafted 1 share of Kenny Golladay this season, and I'm actively trying to sell him because I don't like the long-term risks that are presented to me throughout the entirety of the year. DJ Moore is another player I absolutely love as a talent. I wish the Panthers would stop bringing in more competition for him for targets. And that's what it comes down to here. He's very efficient. He stretches the field, is actually statistically one of the best players in contested catch rate in the NFL. Like when the ball is just thrown up and he's asked, go get it, he catches the ball nearly at a higher clip than anyone else in the league. But what I don't like is that I think Robbie Anderson has a legitimate case to be made here as the most targeted wide receiver in this offense. Terrace Marshall is being force-fed into his progression with this team. He's no joke as a big slot player. And DJ Moore, plain and simple, does not score touchdown receptions. I believe the most he's ever had in a season in his young career is 4. That's not elite usage. It's not going to increase much either, I might add, because that's not his game. His game is efficiency, stretching the field, making big plays happen. But unless those big plays net in touchdowns, he's not a red zone target for this team. So his ceiling is already capped in that facet, in that context, because we know he's not getting usage in that area of the field. But then you consider the other things working against him. Can Sam Darnold, I mean, he did get it done with Teddy Bridgewater last season, but can Sam Darnold be an improvement, or are we moving back in the opposite direction in terms of quarterback play for this team? Is Robbie Anderson going to dig significantly into the usage, the role that we see for DJ Moore this coming season, because Robbie was the most targeted player last season. We see DJ Moore still finished as wide receiver 22. Anderson, ironically, was the wide receiver 23. But they're neck and neck, and I can get Robbie Anderson a couple rounds later. I might just like that value better to begin with. This just isn't a situation, if you can get the hint here, get the gist, my vibe right now. Not loving it. So DJ Moore is a player I'm fading on all counts this year. I only have one share invested into him, and it's in a dynasty league where I drafted him ahead of last season, not even expecting Robbie Anderson to have much of a role for that team. So a bit of a naive decision on my part, but Robbie's taken that offense by storm, and DJ Moore owners are left a little bit unsatisfied here. Adam Thielen's my wide receiver 23. This goes back to the Mike Evans argument, except whereas I'm more confident that Mike Evans can maintain his level of touchdown production, I am less confident that Adam Thielen can do so. Evans was, 13 touchdown receptions. I believe Adam Thielen was 14 TDs last year, less than 1,000 yards receiving. So basically what we're seeing is all of his numbers, or at least nearly half of them, are coming from that touchdown production. And if he even drops down to 7, 8, or 9, that's a big blow to his overall fantasy ceiling, upside, end day production total. You're looking at a hit. You're looking at, already the number 2 in his offense. And the more you kind of think about that, it's a run-first team. Kirk Cousins, not the best quarterback option in the world. I do actually like him a lot as a very safe floor fantasy option. But when Justin Jefferson is that much better, and when Justin Jefferson is getting 140 targets, when he's getting 1,400 yards, when he's just outproducing you at every major statistical marker, I got to at least step back and assess the situation. Is Adam Thielen really worth it at his ADP, or are we just gambling that he can try and maintain the level of touchdowns he had last year? I certainly think he's still a dang good player. I certainly think that there is a time and a place to draft him. But with the other wide receivers, the depth we have at this position group, it's one of those situations where I feel better letting him sit there and either taking a different position or a different player where he's being drafted at right now. And then finally, Odell Beckham Jr. This is something, it's pretty much another A.J. Brown type situation. You're talking about a guy who's going to be asked to be crazy efficient for fantasy owners. The Browns are a run-first team. They have the best offensive line in the National Football League. That means they're going to pound the rock and run play-action passes. Odell Beckham is one of the most electrifying wide receivers of the last 5-10 years. He is one of the most exciting players. But the days of him being a giant where he gets 10 receptions in a game and can blow past the defense and just dominate, that's over. I'm not saying he's not capable of doing that, but in terms of him actually being used as that type of a player, that is no longer. He's going to be the field stretching threat for Baker Mayfield off those play action balls. Because again, that run game is going to be so lethal. It is going to key the defense in. They're going to get very focused on stopping Nick Chubb, stopping Kareem Hunt. That they'll fake the run, play action pass, bootleg around, and boom, Odell Beckham Jr. down the field for a 60-yard touchdown pass. He's just going to have to find a way to make that a consistent part of his game. Now, it doesn't have to be 60 yards and whatnot, but he's going to have to figure out how to be extremely effective with a limited number of targets and, in the end of the game, total receptions and yardage output. You're going to be looking at a lot of 4 and 5 reception games and hoping that he can find ways to get 60-plus yards on that level of usage. 60, 80, 100 yards is ultimately what we would love to see from him, and we want to see those touchdowns as well. But that efficiency is going to be a big factor here and is going to impact his situation a lot more than I think people realize. That's one of the reasons I don't love him this season. But at the end of the day, I do have to acknowledge that that is the situation for others that we're drafting that way as well. Julio Jones, A.J. Brown, to a much lesser extent, DK Metcalf, because I do think that it's just kind of natural for him to get those numbers and get that stuff done at the end of the day. But it's worth bringing up here. OBJ, he's a very risky pick, but the ceiling is still very, very high if he's able to meet that level of efficiency that we've seen him have at previous points in his career. Alrighty, that'll do it for my top 24 fantasy football wide receivers here in late August of 2021. Again, this is just a small piece, a small chunk of that big draft guide collection for this season. That's linked down in the description of today's video. You can go check out the player profiles I've got for each of these players and read up a bit more on the situation, the draft day target range, and a little bit of a recap of their 2020 seasons, just to try and help you paint the picture for how I forecast them a bit more heading into this year. Again, we've got ceiling and floor assessments and some risk radar information in those draft guide profiles as well. So thank you all so much for tuning into today's video. Remember, go check that Discord out before you head on out today, and go check out some of those social medias. We've got merchandise in the description of today's video as well. A bunch of cool stuff. If you've ever got any questions, need anything, put that down in the comment section below, but everything you need can be found in the description as well. So one more time, thank you so much, you guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Peace out.